Hello, and welcome to the Daily Space for today, Wednesday, January 6th, 2021. I am your host, Annie Wilson. Most weekdays, we're here putting science into your brain. Usually, Wednesdays are for Rocket Roundup, and today I'm going to recap a few things that happened in space last year. Despite the challenges the COVID pandemic posed for literally everyone, including the people who launch rockets, there were 104 successful rocket launches out of the 115 orbital launch attempts in 2020. For a success rate of 90.4%. That's actually more rocket launches than in 2019, but with a slightly lower success rate. The last time there was more than 115 orbital launches in a year was 30 years ago in 1990. There's multiple ways to track orbital launches: the origin of the rocket, the country where the launch provider is located, or the actual location where the rocket was launched, also known as spaceport. I use that last option and tally launches by the country where the launch pad is physically located. Here's that breakdown. China, 39, USA, 38, Russia, 8, Kazakhstan, 7, French Guiana, 7, New Zealand, 7, Japan, 4, India, 2, Iran, 2, and Israel, 1. For those of you that are Starship fans, Boca Chica is not on this graphic because a rocket has not launched into orbit from that location. Another way to track launches is by payload destination, literally where the payload of one or more satellites is going to end up. By launch, that was 74 for low Earth orbit, 17 for geosynchronous orbit, 8 for medium Earth orbit, 1 for high Earth orbit, and 4 for heliocentric orbit. These are the spacecraft that are going to another planet or are going to orbit the sun. After a quick break, we'll chat about last year's rockets. Welcome back. All right, to start off the chat about last year's rockets, we need to talk about the smallest and the largest rockets that launched into space. The smallest orbital rocket that reached space last year was Astros Rocket 3, coming in at 11.6 meters tall. To give you an idea of scale, it can be packed inside of a shipping container. The idea is for the rocket to be able to be launched from just about anywhere, but so far it has only been launched out of the Kodiak Spaceport Complex in Kodiak, Alaska. The largest orbital rocket launched in 2020 was the Delta IV Heavy, a heavy launch vehicle developed by Boeing and flown by United Launch Alliance. The Delta IV Heavy is 72 meters tall, 5 meters in diameter, and can lift 28 metric tons into low Earth orbit. And there were a bunch of new rockets launched this year, including several from China. China continues to introduce new rockets to replace its aging families of hypergolic launch vehicles. The Long March 7 Alpha is essentially a Long March 7 with a third stage borrowed from a Long March 3 Bravo. The first flight of the Long March 7 Alpha on March 16, 2020, unfortunately failed due to an issue with the third stage. Another new Chinese rocket this year was the Long March 8. The rocket was based on the Long March 7, but with the reusable first stage. It was successfully launched on December 21st, 2020. Yet another new Chinese rocket this year was the Heixhau 11, a commercially developed small launch vehicle. Its first flight failed when the third stage did not ignite. Finally, the Long March 5 Bravo made its first flight on May 5th, 2020. The Long March 5 Bravo is essentially a Long March 5, hence the name, but without its second stage. It is optimized for launching heavy payloads into low Earth orbit. The first flight carried a test capsule for the next generation crew capsule. The rocket's core stage reached orbit, and caused a bit of concern when it performed an uncontrolled re-entry over the Atlantic Ocean. Pieces of the rocket landed in a village in Cote d'Ivoire, a country on the west coast of Africa. We can't talk about new rockets in 2020 without talking about Starship. SpaceX's Starship achieved several new milestones in 2020, evolving from the less than half size single engine Starhopper that hopped in 2019 to a pair of full size single engine models SN5 and SN6, which lacked aero surfaces, and finally to the 3-engine SN8, which included a full set of aero surfaces and a different alloy hull. SN8 made a 12,500 meter test flight on December 9th. It demonstrated previously untested maneuvers, most impressive of which was the belly flop. These aerodynamic maneuvers will be important to future Starship missions on the Moon and Mars. The test ended with an impressive explosion just as it was landing, caused by the propellant mixture going oxygen-rich due to a lack of fuel tank pressure. After the break, we'll talk about people in space in 2020. 2020 saw numerous experiments conducted by astronauts on the International Space Station that generated over 300 scientific papers published during the year. Some that caught my eye were cookies that were an experiment for the DoubleTree hotel chain, experiments related to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's diseases, force feedback for teleoperation of rovers, microbes that were found outside of the ISS, and in case you missed it, they installed yet another space toilet on the International Space Station. 2020 marked a new generation of human spaceflight, with commercial crew companies finally taking humans into space and returning them to Earth. Along the way, capturing the flag left up there by the crew of the final Space Shuttle mission in 2011. On May 30th, SpaceX launched the Demo 2 mission carrying astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to the ISS on a SpaceX Crew Dragon. The astronauts spent several months on the ISS contributing to station research, maintenance, and upgrades before splashing down safely in the Gulf of Mexico on August 2nd. This marked the first splashdown of an American crewed spacecraft since the Skylab 4 in 1974. The success of the mission cleared the way for SpaceX Crew 1, which saw a Crew Dragon launch on November 15th with NASA astronauts Michael Hopkins, Sharon Walker, Victor Glover, and JAXA astronaut Soichi Noguchi on board. They will spend a standard 6-month rotation at the ISS, returning to Earth in May 2021. People spent a whole lot of time in space in 2020, with 8 astronauts and cosmonauts spending a total of 51 hours and 8 minutes doing extravehicular activities, also known as spacewalks. Chris Cassidy and Robert Behnken had the most EVA time for a total of 23 hours and 37 minutes. The majority of the EVAs on ISS were done to replace the batteries on the station's truss system. Another spacewalk was done to finish repairs on the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer. Those repairs were started in 2019. The sole Russian spacewalk in 2020 was done to prepare for the retirement of the Poisk module when the Nauka module launches in 2021. One of the fun things about spaceflight in 2020 was the variety of zero-G indicators. These zero-G indicators are to indicate the point when cosmonauts and astronauts experience weightlessness. The Soyuz crews started the tradition by taking up small toys, and the SpaceX crews continued it. So Bob and Doug brought up a TY Flippables Tremor, as both of their sons are interested in dinosaurs. The crew of Crew 1 chose Baby Yoda, or as he is officially called in the show, the Child. Soyuz MS-17 brought up a small crocheted cosmonaut made by the wife of one of the cosmonauts, while MS-16's indicator was a small toy unicorn chosen by children of one of the cosmonauts. And more after the break. Welcome back. And now, 2020 for the rovers. How did they fare? Well, Curiosity has driven a total of 23.84 kilometers since it landed on Mars on August 6, 2012. It drove 3.1 kilometers just last year. Among other things in 2020, Curiosity discovered mud minerals pointing to the existence of an ice-covered lake on Mars at some point in the past. China's Jade Rabbit 2 rover landed on the moon in 2019. In February 2020, scientists announced newly discovered subsurface ejecta structures using measurements from the ground-penetrating radar on the rover. So far, it's traversed just over 600 meters on the lunar surface since its landing, with roughly 242 meters traveled in 2020. There was only one lunar attempt in 2020. On November 23rd, China launched Chang'e 5, which landed on the moon on December 1st. The robotic lander collected 1.7 kilograms of lunar soil and rock samples before leaving the moon's surface on December 3rd. It returned to Earth on December 16th. If that sounds like a fast timeline, it's because it was. The total elapsed mission time was just shy of 23 days. This was China's first sample return mission, making them just the third country to return samples from the moon, and the first lunar sample return mission since the Soviet Union's Luna 24 in 1976. There were a couple other sample return missions in 2020. Japan's Hayabusa 2 performed its sample collection at asteroid Ryugu on July 11, 2019, and landed in the Australian outback on December 6th. JAXA's goal was to return 0.1 grams of material from the asteroid. They exceeded this goal and actually returned 5.4 grams of soil and material from the asteroid. And we can't not talk about OSIRIS-REx and Bennu. So on October 20th, OSIRIS-REx conducted its touch-and-go sample acquisition maneuver, making contact with Bennu's surface for about 5 or 6 seconds. It collected so much material from Bennu that there was concern that the sample container would not be able to be properly secured for return. Happily, it stowed away successfully on October 28th. OSIRIS-REx will return to Earth in 2023. Finally, to wrap things up for 2020, here's a quick summary of the satellites from last year. Humanity put a whopping 1,231 satellites into orbit. That includes those launched from other in-orbit craft such as the ISS. 1,196 came directly from rocket launches, and 833 of those were Starlinks. And it wouldn't be a Rocket Roundup without a space toilet update. Currently, there are 5 toilets in space. 3 on the ISS, 1 on the Crew Dragon, and 1 on the Soyuz. And there were 2 toilets burned up in space in 2020 during the re-entries of MS-15 and MS-16. Your random space fact for the week is that Saturn's moon, Mimas, looks like the Death Star from Star Wars. And that rounds out our show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I have been your host, Annie Wilson. Today's script was researched, written, and edited by Dave Ballard, Gordon Dewis, Pamela Gay, Beth Johnson, Eric Mattis, Allie Pelfrey, and myself. Engineering is provided by Allie Pelfrey, and the web content will be produced by Beth Johnson. Our executive producer and fearless leader is Dr. Pamela Gay. The Daily Space and Rocket Roundup is a product of the Planetary Science Institute, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to exploring our solar system and beyond. We are here thanks to the generous contributions of people just like you. The best way you can support us is through Patreon at patreon.com/CosmoQuestX. You like us? Please tell somebody. You never know whose life you can change by adding a daily dose of science.